Emerald podcast series. Research that makes a difference.
Today, I'm joined by Oláyínká Àkànle, who lectures for the Department of Sociology at the University of Ibadan, Nigeria, and who is also a research associate in the Department of Sociology at the University of Johannesburg, South Africa. He is a scholar and an expert on social policy, development sociology, children and youth studies, inequality, international migration, sociological practice, and sustainable development. With two edited volumes forthcoming in 2022 centered around youth exclusion and empowerment in the contemporary global order, he's interested in the youth experience of exclusion and sustainable pathways forward. Thank you for joining me, Oláyínká. Can I start off by asking you why the existential exclusion of youth is a pressing issue and how it manifests?
It's a pressing issue in the sense that it is prevalent, is deep-rooted, and is consistent across countries. And based on our research, and like you will find in the two volumes that we are publishing on this, is widespread in the sense that whether you're talking about developed countries or developing countries, we could see elements of youth exclusion that is very deep-rooted in this society. And the why it is very important is that we hypothesize or we believe that as long as this group of people that we categorize as youth are not allowed to play active roles in the structure of their society, contribute to development of their society, then we're going to be leaving a whole army of people that could jumpstart development across the world or sustain development across the world. If you look at some countries, especially in developing countries, we have what we call youth bulge. Youth bulge in the sense that this group of people make a large chunk of their population structure. If you look at the population pyramid of many of these countries, you have a lot of them being youth. And we're beginning to talk about demographic dividends of the youth. That is, if we are able to appropriate this group of people and allow them to contribute to the development process, we're going to all benefit from it. But if we do not allow them to play active role in determining what happens in their countries, definitely we're going to have crisis in our hands in the short run and in the long run. In the sense that these people are so many in some countries, even where they are not so many, they are energetic, they are creative, they are ambitious, and they have the capacity to determine what happens in the country, whether explicitly or implicitly. So depending on how we manage this group of people, they can be demographic gains or demographic problem for us in the short run and in the long run. So we believe that this is prevalent, is deep-rooted, and is consistent among countries. And the way it happens is not allowing this group of people we call the youth to play active role. Youth exclusion actually means not allowing the youth to be actively involved in objective terms in determining what happens in their country or in their society for one or two reasons, considering them as, and this turns them to liabilities rather than benefits. If you look at so many countries, especially in developing countries, you have a lot of problems that they face in those countries being traceable to youth exclusion. If you talk about insecurity, if you talk about a lot of other issues, you could see elements of these youth who are not able to breathe, then looking for ways to express themselves. And you could see this in the chapters that make up these two volumes, how they are excluded and how this becomes development problems rather than development gains. And we can also argue that societies where youth are allowed to play active role, they may be able to achieve development in sustainable terms and more stability in their countries. I think this is why we believe that this is not a theoretical matter. It's a pragmatic issue that we need to take seriously, especially against the background of sustainable development goal. Because you have to leave no one behind, depending on who they are. Everybody has to be carried along. Social inclusion is very important. But what we are seeing is social exclusion as far as youth are concerned, where they are seen as the development liability and powerless people who are not listened to at all. And we believe countries need to take this very seriously, looking towards the youths and how they can be better included for sustainable growth and development of such countries.
Now, your two books are divided up by subject matter, and the first one discusses economy, education, and governance. Can you talk us through how these concerns confront youth and the consequences of this?
Yeah, what we try to look at in this volume that you've just mentioned is to have chapters talk about how youth are excluded from the economic system of their countries, from governance system of their countries. And for example, if you look at the economic system of many countries, when you talk about unemployment, you see the youth suffering more in this realm, especially in the formal sector. And we say this exclusion in the economic system, particularly the formal system, actually is a problem. That's why if you look at the World Bank data of many countries, some countries have as much as 30% youth unemployment in their countries. And if you look at the educational system of this society also, when you look at the literacy level of many countries, you find a lot of the youth having low literacy level. And even if you look at also issues of enrollment and access to education in many countries. Even in poor countries, the access is largely unavailable or short circuited and very low for them. Access in terms of being able to go to school and being able to get good quality education is a problem in some of those countries. And even if you look at the developed countries, even many of the youth struggle significantly to be able to access education. Many of them are amassing huge debt to go into school. And even when they go to school, they spend most of the rest of their life paying this debt. If you look at the chapter, they are talking about roads must fall, fees must fall, even in middle income countries. So we try to look at the educational system to demonstrate how youth are excluded. And even in governance, this is even very massive in terms of the youth not being able to play active role in the governance system of their country. If you look at many of the countries we have across the world now, you hardly have the youth playing active role at the governance level. In many poor countries, the youth are used as foot soldiers to disrupt governance processes. And many of them are used as agents of destabilization by the older adults. So what we try to do in that place is to use these contextual scenarios or contextual case studies to demonstrate empirically and pragmatically at how youth are excluded from the system of their society using these three broad clusters of experiences and context in terms of education, economy, and governance. Interestingly, these three structures, these three settings, these three scenarios happen to be strategic in determining how the youth, how their present play out, and how their future may be impacted. For example, if youth don't have significant access, inclusive access to education, you're going to bring, and the world is driven by knowledge system now. We talk about knowledge economy. We then have a group of people who don't have what it takes to compete across the world and to contribute significantly, effectively into their societal system because they will be operating within negative educational coefficient. At the same time, the economy, they are supposed to contribute to the gross domestic product of their country, be able to attract in their foreign investment into their country, and be able to create new economic system and structures that be able to lift their countries out of poverty and be able to sustain the growth and development of those countries that are already developed. And if you now look at governance, talking about decision making, talking about ability to sustain their society by making informed decisions across level, not only at the macro level, even at micro level. They should be able to have their voices. In some countries, we now have some countries where they're talking about not too young to run. This is an advocacy system where the youth are crying for spaces because the older adults have stifled their voices, stifled their political capacity. They are used as disruptive agent of governance system rather than productive system, contributing to a productive system of the governance system. So they are playing more disabling role rather than enabling role and productive role. So we will use these three case studies, three clusters of scenarios to demonstrate the level of youth exclusion and the need for them to be empowered within that system.
Yeah, I find it really interesting how you divided your subjects up. And so the second volume focuses on migrations, identity, and the digital space. So, what are the highlights from that collection?
That collection also is a very fantastic one. What we're trying to do in that place is to know, we also now talk about the digital economy, the digital system of the world. Technology, we're going to drive development going forward. We know the fossil fuel relying on primary natural resources like oil and gas and the rest of them. People are now talking about the green energy, greening the environment, alternative energy system, technology-driven system and society. So we're trying to look at the digital divide across the world. Anybody or any youth that will make significant contribution to the development of the world in the nearest future, we have to be empowered in digital sense, the digital space. So what we're trying to do at digital level is to look at how prepared, how included are the youth in terms of leveraging digital system or digital society in a way that they can contribute to development. Looking at the real issues in fact, that digital area is very fundamental. And depending on the countries you are looking at, many developing countries actually are excluded at digital space. You know, this digital divide. Many of the poor countries, developing countries, are actually not players in that area. Even the developed countries that we see as leaders in the digital system also still need to be better include the youth and better empower them. Rather than be consumers of digital products, they need to better innovate and allow to innovate going to the future. So that area, we look at the context and scenarios that we can use. And also, if you look at also in terms of the migration, we look at how migration drives development and how the youth, in an attempt to cope with strategic exclusion that they suffer, how they resort to migration processes, looking for opportunities outside of their disempowered society. And also looking about their identity, constructing the identity of the youth. How do they see themselves? How are they seen? How do they see themselves? And how does the construction of identity across categories, how does it influence how they see themselves? And how do they see themselves along identity? How does this affect their capacity to contribute to development? It's a fantastic collection, I must say. And readers will find it very interesting.
I see that your contributions come from all over the world, and I was wondering if maybe you could talk about some of the differences between, or really the similarities as well, between the developed countries that you're dealing with and the undeveloped countries.
Yeah, in fact, it's intentional to make it global. You know, sometimes when we talk about this or some of these exclusionary systems, sometimes we think about maybe some countries not having the issues at all. That's why we make sure that we had, and interestingly, we have authors across the world, across developed countries, across poor countries, if I may use the word poor carefully. What we found is that generally youth exclusion cuts across countries, whether developed or undeveloped. But the manifestations, intensity, profoundness, and deep-rootedness of this exclusion vary. And the patterns of this exclusion vary. You know, and for example, in terms of economy, definitely poor countries, definitely we have a different dimension in terms of unemployment, which is far more. But in terms of governance, we find that in all countries that we studied there, we can find some element of exclusion, you know, across these countries, even though their profoundness will be different. Even though developed countries may fare better in terms of accountability and transparency in their governance system, and they are able to also ameliorate the human condition of the youth across some of these clusters. So definitely poor countries have specific experiences and manifestation of youth exclusion that are a bit different from developed countries. But one thing we do find in this collection is that youth exclusion cuts across all countries, and all countries have to take it seriously. You know, not minding the differential manifestation across these societies. I think that must be made, and it's powerfully noted in the book.
Did that surprise you to find how widespread it is across different economies and across different cultures?
Sincerely, I must tell you, it's surprising. It's surprising because anecdotal experiences and general narrative is that some countries, everybody is included. But from contributions from across the world, developed countries, we see element of exclusions across countries, and it's quite surprising, you know. And that is why I find these books very illuminating. For me personally, I'm very excited to see people read this book and see the surprising things we have found. That even it doesn't matter how developed countries are, elements of exclusions are there, from low income countries to middle income countries to high income countries. Exclusion coefficient of countries are very concerning, and I think it's very important to note.
Yeah, well, something else that I'm interested in is the aspect of sustainable development. And I was wondering if you could talk about the relationship between youth empowerment and sustainable development.
Yeah, what is sustainable development? Sustainable development means ability to meet the development need of the current generation without negating the capacity of the future generation to meet their own. That's what sustainable development means generally. And when you now look at sustainable development goal as a development framework to jumpstart development across the world, especially in developing countries, I will say that, and there's a United Nations report on youth, yeah, and this also emphasizes the fact that youth need to be better included, if because sustainable development means everybody is carried along at the same pace. That's why the new sustainable development goal says having they have the mantra leaving no one behind. If we leave the youth behind, not empowering them to own their spaces and to contribute effectively across institutions, across systems, across structures, definitely we are leaving them behind. And if we leave this massive number of people behind, definitely that development that we achieve can never be sustainable. And that's why you see many countries having different issues. Protest. I'm sure you heard of the Arab Spring. You are also, I'm sure you are aware of protests across countries. In fact, a major chapter in this book talks about protests, and how it's about the youth eating back, lashing back at the system. Another protest has started again now across in some countries, and most of them are youth who are expressing frustration at how they are left out of governance. And some older generation just hijack their system and chokehold the youth to the extent that they don't have a voice and they asking for voice.
That is what I wanted to ask you about, how the youth can empower themselves in response to this.
Yeah, the youth can empower themselves in terms of asking for their spaces, ask legitimate questions from the system, and be innovative. And there is a chapter in one of the volumes that is talking about youth, undergraduate and graduate, getting involved in income earning activities aside the formal system. It's an innovative way. So the youth themselves have to continue to ask questions, be sensitized, and not have entitlement mentality, but keep engaging with the system. And that's why another book, if you look at the conclusion and introduction to these books, you will see that intentionally we are pragmatic, interrogating policies, asking questions, and every stakeholder has to ask questions. And the youth themselves have to be conscientized. And when they ask questions, the system needs to allow them and to have their voices heard. And I think that's another important thing about this book is that it's a book that is asking questions, sensitizing the whole world, the scholars, the academic, and development partners, civil society organizations, non-governmental organizations, and government themselves to draw attention to these salient issues that people are not taking seriously. The empowerment we're talking about here is allowing them to play active role, not silencing them. Strategic empowerment of the need to allow them to hear their views and to listen to, and for policies to be intentional in aggregating the youth and programming for the youth in a way they are able to go forward. In some countries, they have stifled, they have disempowered the youth in the sense that they are seen as people who have nothing to contribute to the system, people who are just to be extorted and exploited for the gains of another category of people other than themselves. I think this is very important for us to be able to go forward.
Going back to that sustainability issue, what do you see as sustainable pathways out of the trajectory of youth exclusion?
Yeah, the sustainable pathway out of this is for multi-stakeholders approach to it, and that's the approach we adopted in this book. In the sense that it's a clarion call to everybody to pay closer attention to the need of the youth, to be more involved, to be more included in across policies and across practices. For example, governments have roles to play, youth themselves have role to play, non-governmental actors have role to play, academia have role to play, and scholars. In fact, that's why we decided to do this book as contribution to knowledge, and we are so grateful to Emerald for agreeing to publish this book. So we just believe everybody, even at our own micro level, interpersonal level, we must give more significant attention to the youth in terms of allowing them to play their spaces. And when they demand their spaces, We should not see them as rebellious group of people, or as troublesome group of people, or as lazy group of people, but listen to the messages they are passing. Particularly, I work with youth a lot as an academic, and I also operate at the development practice. I've seen that this is a group of people that have a lot of innovations and a lot of energy and a lot of interest to contribute, and they are very creative also. So if we allow them, and that's why this is actually where the inspirations come. I've had reason to work with a number of youth, to work with them across levels, and I find them to be very strong contributors to development if we allow them. So I think everybody just needs to, all hands have to be on deck to realize the need to better include these youth going forward. I think there's a need for self realization and realization of significant orders in for the youth to be better included, and to come to the realization that these people are excluded and there's a need to include them. I think that's very important going forward.
Well, I think a really interesting aspect of your book is that you offer different perspectives in response to the issue. So, how can stakeholders from practical, academic, and policy perspectives make a difference?
Academics need to do more researches. Not just like you see this book, we are intentionally global so that we have a comparative panoramic view of the issue. So, and that's why we try to remove some chapters that appear to be repetitive and or that are too academic. We think there is need for more researches around this issue, and there's also the need for more policies, not just policies, but policies that are action, policies that are practical, policies that are able to make change. Because these youth, they are the change agents that everybody needs. So we need policies that are implementable, and not just policies that will just be there, but policies that will be implemented. So more policies are needed, and the current one need to be implemented more effectively. And there's a need to better engage the subject matter going forward across spaces.
So, what do you think are the next steps? What do you see in the future of global youth studies and responses to this critical challenge?
Yeah, I think the response is going forward is to continue to push this book this issue to the front burner. As long as we continue to talk about it, organize conferences around it, organize stakeholder workshops around it, organize policy discourses around it, then people will realize this the more. And we also have to showcase best practices so that people see. We are not just crying foul, but we are also showcasing best practices and the benefit of better youth exclusion. I think the whole world will catch the idea, and there will be need for. In some countries, there are already struggles for youth inclusion and struggles for youth celebrations. But most of the time, we make some gains, and gains become losses in the shortest of time. So I think to continue to push it to the front burner and continue to discuss it. Personally, I've made this my agenda around my sphere of influence in my network. I built a framework of youth groups around myself. I'm also not an old man, so I'm youth at art, youthful at art, and also in action. So whenever I walk around the youth, I follow them up and conscientize them the need to contribute their own culture and not play the victim, but the positive change agent around me. So I think everybody, including policymakers, academics, and scholars, and NGOs or non-governmental organizations or civil society organizations have to come to this realization and be intentional about jumpstarting the youth and allowing them their spaces. So if you keep the discourse going on and the challenge is going on and bring it to the front burner, I think the future is bright, but we need more collective action to galvanize the change that we want.
It sounds like this collective action you're talking about is very much on the local level. Is that where you're coming from? Do you think that the balance between the local and the national, is there a struggle there, or can you say something about that?
I think it has to be multi-level actually. Even before you have global action, there has to be local level galvanization. It's the collectivity or collectivization of what happens at the local level that resonates at the national level and that resonates at the global level. Actions will not just start at the global if they don't have local roots. My suggestion and recommendation is that we have to be micro, intentionally, strategically, and be macro at the same time. So we need a collective action, not just disjointed action. What we have had is a disjointed action. In fact, another strength of these volumes is to be able to bring particular national scenarios and collectivize them at global level. So that if you hold the volumes of the book, you are able to see a complete picture across national and global level. So it's multi-level, multi-stakeholder, multi-institutional approaches that we are recommending in this book. But if we have the global without the national or the local, then there will be no basis, there will be no root. So it has to be multi-level and strategically multi-stakeholder. And I think that's very important. The future is bright if you continue along this line.
Well, it sounds like you've built a strong network of researchers. Where do you see this going now in the future?
I'm positive. I keep building this network of researchers around these studies. And I try to maintain this network because it takes all of us working together along the same line to be able to move forward. And I see this as going somewhere positive in the nearest future. And I also believe that it is a conversation, it's a collective realization that we need to take forward. And I believe it's going to be very good, very well in the future. We are also believing that when these volumes hit the shelf, we expect that we will also continue to work and monitor developments in that area. If it means doing more or further researches, further interventions, we plan to take it forward. So it's a conversation, it's a process we have in mind and this is just part of the processes that we have in mind, and we promise to do more as we see event unfold until we see the change that we want sustainably into the future for the benefit of everybody, both the youth and the significant older adults and even younger ones, so that everybody is carried along towards sustainable pathway to development and no one is left behind, not even the youth. That's what we have in mind.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed our conversation. I really learned a lot. This is really insightful.
Thank you very much, Daniel.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. You can find a transcript of our conversation as well as more information about our guest on our website. I'd like to thank Katie Mathers for her help with today's episode, as well as Alex Jungies of This Is Distorted.